Am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Great, thank you. I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. We're going to win this debate by proving you two important things here in my argument. First, why I will be a better ruler, therefore for moral grounds, I'm just going to be much better for the universe that I care about, and therefore win on this moral ground. And secondly, why in the individual interest, it's going to be much better for me to be a ruler and not to go back to Earth. One point of framing before we begin, it's important to notice that the info site didn't say that we are a specific protagonist in this world, and it's all specifically the one from the books. Therefore, we think we are a protagonist, but not the specific one from the story itself, which is something important. Let's start with the first argument. I'm going to be better ruler from moral grounds. So first of all, what moral ground means for me as a protagonist? We think that the good of my universe is something that I care about more than anything else, for surely more than any other universe around the world. We think that we get moral agent to something where I feel identification with. This is true for three reasons. A, just it is the norm. We just don't feel the same moral agent for germs or for animals as we feel for humans. As much as it's closer to me, I feel more moral ground to it. Secondly, just empathy. I know the feelings. I can recognize the feelings on the other side. I feel that are more important to me. And third of all, I don't know what other creatures or aliens or universes, what these people want. I think it's like I don't know if fish feel pain or not. I don't know what the aliens feel, what aliens want. It's much easier for me to exclude myself from having any ability to help them or any moral duty. Therefore, we just think that my universe is the most important moral thing for me in the world. Now, moving to the second burden here, why moral grounds of my universe is important for me as a whole, and why do you think it's extremely important for me as a human being? First of all, we just think that I gave up any individual benefits in order to go for this voyage around space. We think that I probably gave up being with my family, being with my friends, doing things that I like, living my hobbies. It's a really hard time to spend so much time in space. Therefore, I believe that I did it probably in order to do something for the world, in order to do big change. It's something that's probably more important to me than my own little benefits. Secondly, just think that it is a unique opportunity once I met this ruler. We think that even if in advance I didn't care so much about the universe, once I meet this person and I know that he's crazy and he's doing really bad things to the universe, I feel the responsibility to try to change something when I'm the only one who can do it. And I don't know if in years anyone will meet them as a whole. If I go back to it, I know that if I don't do it, any disease I will see, any war I will see in the earth, I know it's my fault that I didn't stop. And third of all, I just internalized the impact once I started questioning him and talking to him about it. I think that once I talked about him, do you know what happened in the world? Do you know all the wars that you just did and discovered all these things? This is exactly where it become much more accessible to my brain, that all of these things happen. Now I can change it. I can't forget it once it's already in my brain. Now, why I think that I'm going to be much better ruler and better for my own universe? Three reasons. A, it's just the change of interest between me and them. We think that, first of all, he's a crazy person. We think that he's doing things for abusement. He's really weird. Literally, the info slide saying so. I believe myself it needs to be somewhat more rational and considerable than this crazy person. Secondly, this person has no preference to my own universe specifically, or the other trillions. We think that even if he, for some reason, is going to be a moral creature, he's not going to benefit my universe. He can one day wake up and say, "Oh, I don't want Earth. Let's try to make another universe much bigger and much more important." Therefore, I know for myself that I benefit my own universe, and I'm going to prefer that. And third of all, just think that I know that he's doing bad things. I saw wars. I saw pandemics. I saw bad things happen on Earth. We think that I know for a fact that he does bad things. I believe myself not to be the one who wants wars and pandemics and all these bad things. I believe I have better interests. The second mechanism is the awareness. We know that these rulers we can't convince them that their thoughts can actually make a difference in the world. They're doing things for abusement. They don't even think about the consequences of the things that they are doing. Therefore, even if they care about moral, they just don't know and they're not aware that they're causing this. I know the consequences. I know that I can at least calculate it in my head. And third of all, just the knowledge. Because even if they are aware, they really don't know what are the problems on my universe. They didn't see the global warming. They don't know what people care about. They can just wake up in the morning and say, "Oh, I'm really cold. Let's make the world even hotter." They really don't know what the problems in my universe specifically is and what are the problems that human beings suffer. I know these things because I saw it, because I'm interested in it, and because in the starting point when I become the ruler, I know all the problems that exist in the status quo, and I control everything from that point on. Therefore, I'm going to also know all the problems on things in the future. For these reasons, just believe I'm going to be much better ruler in moral ground. And moving to my second one, why it's going to be better for me individually. So first of all, what we think that is good for me specifically, what things that I care about individually. We know that I am an adventurous person. I literally went to a space journey, therefore I'm probably very into excitement and knowing new things. Second of all, I'm used to be alone. I spent probably years or at least months traveling the space. So probably company is not something that I really care about, but more to do something, to gain some power and to change the world. And third of all, we know that I'm very curious. This is true because I saw this weird person and started to asking them questions about all what happened around the world, tried to convince them probably I'm a curious person. Why I get these things much more as a ruler. Before I continue, POI.
Saying that someone is a better ruler presumes an objective metric of good rule. Given this is a person with a very subjective ideology, subjective morality, and limited problem-solving skill, how can you on any metric claim that their results are going to be better than the random world?
Yeah. We're totally willing to say that it's subjective morality. I believe that my universe is the most important thing. For me, I believe that these things are most important for me than anything else. Therefore, for me, it is much more moral if I'm going to rule, not anything else. We're not talking about objective moral. We're talking about my moral, and this is what is important in actor motion. Now, why I think I'll be much better as a ruler for myself? First of all, it's my curiosity. I just literally know all the information in the world. I know what aliens, which is probably something I was curious about and tried to look about. I know how the universe works, what science, all the things that probably an astronaut cared about. I know all these things immediately when I become a ruler. Secondly, it's excitement, because we think that once I have internal life, I experience these huge occasions of planets come and go, universes changes. It's things that I'm very excited about. The third of all is the power to change the world, as I explained, something that I care about. Now, why I can get these things on Earth, why lives in Earth are going to be crazy for me if I know this lunatic keep controlling me. 3 reasons. A, there is no meaningful life once I know that there's a lunatic controlling everything. I know that everything is determined. Therefore, nothing that I do, good or bad, can change my future. When I see injustice in the world, I say there is nothing I can do. This injustice just because of this ruler, and not because something I can do or did. Religions are not important in this world because I know they are all a lie. Secondly, just no one will believe me. I will feel much lonely. You can tell them, no, this religion is a lie. No, there's someone controlling the world. It doesn't matter what you do. Nobody will believe me. I will just be much more alone. And third of all, it's the guilt I feel every time I see something bad happening, which will eat me from inside. For these reasons, I think it's awful for me. Please propose.
Thank you very much for that fine speech. I'd like to invite the leader of the opposition to give their speech, please.
Okay, can someone just confirm that I'm clearly audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
Thank you. In that case, I will be starting in 3, 2, 1. 2 levels from opposition. First, why it's psychologically horrible. 2, why you will not be a good ruler for anyone. All of rebuttal is integrated. Let's examine the psychology. First of all, what is your immediate psychological reaction when put in this situation? First of all, you perceive a guy which on Earth is the definition of a fruitcake, the very embodiment of a crazy person, a person who doesn't have any faculties or comprehension of the world around them. This is something you're very likely to fear, insofar as it represents a loss of agency, a loss of any meaningful ability to think and experience emotions from your perspective. You imagine yourself as such the very moment you imagine yourself in this position of responsibility, which means that your primary reaction is to want to refuse this responsibility. Secondly, the responsibility in and of itself is unfathomable. At one point, you're struck with the thought that you're responsible for the pain and the suffering and the emotions of every single person in your galaxy and all other galaxies. This very thought, insofar as you cannot conceive it in terms of its size, there is no terms in numbers or words which you can put it in, means that the natural defense mechanism you have is to recuse yourself from this thought. Thirdly, you're a space adventurer, and Lior concedes this. He says you want excitement, you want to satisfy your curiosity, you literally have a chance to travel the universe in a top high-tech spacecraft powered by the Improbability Drive. This responsibility requires you to discard that. It requires you to spend the entirety of eternity, I repeat, eternity, with no chance to leave, on one single moon, eternity in loneliness, with no one to share experiences with. You never visit the places you're curious about. You never go on adventures. If you do go on these adventures, you're never able to share them with anyone. You see other people's lives, you carry the responsibility, but you're never able to live the life you wanted to live. But fourthly, you're aware of the horrors horrors of immortality. Know that within this universe, a very famous story is one of Wowbagger the Infinitely Prolonged, the guy who managed to become immortal by accident and now is literally begging other people to kill him. He found Thor and begged Thor to hit him on the head with the hammer because he cannot fathom immortality. Insofar as these people are famous in the universe, they've been to the heart of gold, which is your spaceship. You know of these stories and you know the horrors you're going to face, which means you're likely to want to refuse the responsibility and rationalize why you did it. You will tell yourself, I'm not the one to do this. I'm not able to fathom this. Secondly, you can delegate. You can say, I'm going to find someone else who is a better person than me. I'm going to tell them of the existence of this moon and they can become the person. You can tell yourself you can change and help people in other ways that are more suited to you. Why is this important? Because you are a character faced with this situation. That is what the motion says. Lior concedes this when he says it's functionally a actor motion, which means that if we prove that in the situation you find yourself in, you're likely to want to refuse the responsibility. This is logically prior to any of the analysis coming from proposition as to why you're going to be a good ruler. But even if you accept the position, what is likely to happen to you? First of all, you're going to be overwhelmed by pain. All of a sudden, you see all the horrors happening in the universe. The genocide and the pandemics Lior talks about happen not only in our planet, in our galaxy, but in all other galaxies. So even if you a priori care only about your own, if you have the basic level of empathy which government presumes this person has, you are beset by incredible amounts of pain that you cannot fathom in a very visceral way. But secondly, you are also likely to go insane, because not only do you see all of these horrors, but also the scale of stress is immense. The sheer quantity of information. You're receiving info about thousands upon thousands of planets, millions upon millions and billions of people at every single point. Your brain is not primed to process this stimuli. But furthermore, you lose any conception of the passage of time, because every day is the same and you live for an eternity. There is no concept of aging. There is no concept of anchors, like events you look forward to or certain processes that happen around you that anchor you to time, which means you're likely to feel a feeling of disembodiment. This is why people go crazy in solitary confinement, because they spend months away from individuals, and then when they return to society and have a hard time like coming back, this is solitary, but to the power of 1,000. But you also lose any conception of meaning, insofar as you lose communication to people around you, you lose any meaningful support structure, you do not communicate your thoughts, and therefore you become trapped within your thoughts. The guy who is currently running the universe is a testament to this. The problem is not just that this is a harm for you, but also you are rationally going to be unaware that you have gone insane, because from an insane person's perspective, they're not insane, because they do not have any external proof of that, which means that one, you are aware that at some point you may go insane, but you don't know when that's going to happen, so you functionally fear that all the time. But secondly, the damage this person can do then becomes equal to our universe, to the guy who is currently running it. And thirdly, the loneliness in and of itself, the awareness there's nothing to look forward to in terms of communicating with people, is also likely to be horrible. But lastly, the harm of immortality, the inability to opt out. We see, first of all, this is a harm in and of itself, because human beings, at the worst case, they have an ability to opt out of their lives insofar as they can end them. This person lives for an eternity and is unable to end their life, which means they're forced into suffering. But also the overriding thought that this person faces is one of, this will never end. Whenever you feel suffering, whenever you feel conflicted, you cannot comfort yourself by saying this too shall pass, because you know it never passes. This proves two things. One, it is a horrible harm to this individual, and we're unsure why from the perspective of an actor motion, which the government concedes we should prioritize the universe over this individual. But secondly, it also proves that you're unlikely to be a good ruler, specifically because you also develop a sense of meaninglessness and selflessness, because you cannot deal with this. Know that omnipotence and omniscience do not also presume your ability to handle these things. Even if this person were God himself, even God had to rest on the seventh day of creation because it overwhelmed him. This person is not God. It is a person with limited faculties, granted powers they cannot fathom. Before I provide more analysis to why they're unlikely to be a good ruler for the universe, I will take a POI.
Tim, it might be the wishful thing for you to do to just rationalize to yourself and forget, but just knowing you could have stopped any genocide across the universe and didn't do it, it's not easy to forget.
People can do a lot of good things in their lives. Very often we recuse ourselves from doing them because we do not want to accept the responsibility. I've given you like 8 distinct reasons why this is likely to be overwhelming. I've given you 3 rationalizations you can use. A 15-second POI, not enough to dismantle it. I'm looking forward to your next speech. But why will you not be a good ruler of the universe? And this disproves the crux of their case. First of all, even if you do possess all of the information in terms of omniscience, this does not presume absolute skill. Not people who are actually trained to run things, like CEOs and presidents and prime ministers of countries, fuck things up on an infinitely smaller scale than the universe. Secondly, every decision is a trade-off. Whatever you do, you necessarily cause pain to someone. At this point, you have to take ownership of that pain. insofar as you're always responsible for someone else's suffering, but you can never explain why you did it because you have no contact with these people, means you're likely to be demotivated to keep on running the universe, recuse yourself, and become the crazy guy. But Leslie, there is no correct decision. Trade-offs are not simple. On Earth, culling the human population would lead to a thriving of the animal population. Releasing a pandemic is bad now, but in the future, there's less humans who waste less resources, and maybe humanity survives for longer. All of these trade-offs are not something that a mortal person has to contend with, but now you have to contend with them. Not only does this mean that these amounts of complex trade-offs are multiplied by the entire size of the universe, but it also means there is fundamentally no correct decision, because it's unclear, even for our own galaxy, even for humans, which decision to prioritize. Should we hurt humans now for humans to live longer in the future? Who knows? Certainly not this person, which fundamentally disproves, insofar as they don't have epistemic access to the truth, that they're going to be a good ruler. But lastly, the comparative is our world. The Hitchhiker's Guide for the Galaxy starts from our world. The world run by the guy in the sky is not that bad of a world. It's a world where we're debating this final. It's perfectly fine in comparative to what this person could do and to the harm this person may face on their side of the house. For all these reasons, the Irish Creation Association stands triumphant in this debate.
I thank you very much for that fine speech. I'd like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister to give their speech, please.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I'm going to have 1.5 points in my speech. I'm going to talk about relationships and why no interaction you're ever going to have is going to have any meaning again. And that is also going to extend to any form of experience I'm going to have in my life, which is just going to be meaningless and suffering. And second, but before that, let's do a few points of rebuttal. Okay. Let's talk about some things that are symmetrical in this debate, right? The sheer amount of responsibility you feel is symmetrical, because anytime something bad happens, anytime you think of a genocide in the world, anytime people you love or care about are hurt or just or in pain, you know you could have avoided it. You know that you could have been in position to prevent that. This means that literally whenever anything bad happens in the world, you still feel the sheer weight of this responsibility. So it's not like if you go away, then you don't feel responsibility. This happens on both sides. Second, this happens on both sides. And then another rebuttal. You tell us that you're going to go crazy. You imagine you imagine yourself going crazy like this person. A couple of reasons why that's not true. A, you don't necessarily think that this person became this way, but they are just lunatic or crazy and for some reason were put in that position. Second of all, you think highly of yourself. You are an adventurer. You are the only person with an improbability drive. Maybe you used to think of yourself as ruler of the universe, though we're not a specific character. Maybe you want this kind of power, you seek it out. That's why you arrived there in the first place, right? The improbability drive takes you where you want to be. This means you think super highly of yourself and think you are likely to not be insane. You are likely to be able to deal with this information and and therefore you don't think you are actually going to go insane. Second, lastly, on immortality. Look, we really just don't think it's going to be as horrible as you think. First of all, if you lose a concept of time, that's great. That means you also have no perception of it being infinite time. It doesn't feel like infinite time. It might feel like 2 years, and therefore it really doesn't matter that it's infinite time. It doesn't feel that way, and it's fine. And then on the question of like actually ruling and what it feels like. First of all, the assumption that things need to have a trade-off is exactly that, an assumption. I don't know why it is that you need to wipe out humans in order to prevent global warming as a literal god. I think maybe you could probably do both. I don't know why it is you need to wipe out humanity in order to save animals. Maybe you can teach humans to do things properly. I don't think there's an inherent trade-off and you're not likely to make it. And about there being no correct decision, who cares? I'm not an objective moral being. I don't care about objective morality. I don't want the good of the world. I want the good of the people I love. I don't know. If you have to ask me if I have to like prioritize humanity over animals, my answer is easy. I prefer humanity. Great. It's very simple, especially for a person who's going to be the ruler of the universe. Let's talk about loneliness, right? So let's talk about why interactions you have are never going to have any meaning. Look, what's important to us in interactions? It is the sense that they are meaningful and that people understand me. It's that other people are choosing to interact with me, and it's other people that have agency and will and choice are talking to me and want to be in my and want to have a relationship with me, and that I'm giving them any form of happiness. Why can't I forget the fact that everything around me is meaningless and that I'm not getting it? First of all, this is a complete shock. It restructures my understanding of the universe completely. Even if I thought that there was some God that was deciding things, I didn't think it was happening literally on a whim. Notice that this person isn't like a lunatic in the sense that they can't talk to me. They can have a conversation, meaning that it's not like that they're choosing things at random. They're doing it on a whim. Should we have genocide today? I don't know. I woke up in a bad mood, so sure, let's have some genocide. Should we have famine today? I don't know. Yesterday I made people happy. It feels like maybe I should have people have a famine. Or maybe things should be good tomorrow. I don't know. I'm in a good mood. My cat caught a bird that was like funny. Maybe I should make a planet with dinosaurs. This isn't like they're random. It's just like some person's whim. It's like if Ron woke up tomorrow morning and decided he wanted to control the universe. I don't know what happened. He's not objective either. He also has interests, which means the interests aren't greater good. I can't justify to myself that genocide is happening for a good reason. I can't justify to myself that humanity is being wiped out for global warming, because that's not what's happening. Maybe all of the bad things are happening. So it's restructuring my complete understanding of the universe. I have daily reminders, literally every event that happens, everything I see in the world, I think about this one conversation and the knowledge that some ruler is doing it. Every time something bad happens and I want to vent about it and complain that it was completely avoidable and it's just some random person, I can't do it. I think about how I might have been able to avoid it. I become a nihilist and I'm judged by people around me when I don't want to do anything to help other people because I don't see that there's a point, because tomorrow a person might wake up in a bad mood and like wipe us all out. So I'm judged by those people and I can't explain to them why I'm doing the things. And I'm probably just gonna replay the conversation in my head for thousands and thousands of I don't know, however long I'm going to live, for all of the years and for a really long time, and remember it all the time. What does this mean about my ability to relate to other people? Look, I can't relate to their struggles. It's really meaningless. I cannot give them advice on how to make things better because tomorrow I don't know what's going to happen and whether it's going to be meaningful in any way or have any effect on the universe, because the lunatic might wake up tomorrow morning and decide, I don't know, Earth looks like a good place to build a highway. Second, speaking, wow, I know what I wrote. Okay. When good things happen to me, or when people tell me about how much they love me or how much they respect me or things like that, I don't feel like I've deserved it. I feel like it's meaningless and I don't believe them because I didn't do anything to deserve it. It was just some lunatic waking up tomorrow morning and saying, I don't know, people who work in your field should have success today. Good job, good luck. And sure, I can read my handwriting, but before that, Tim, go.
In resolving the pandemic, some people think we should go for a complete lockdown. Some would prioritize the economy. Both of these focus on prioritizing humans, but humans cannot agree. Your life as this person is a multitude of such decisions, which means you're consistently in a moral dilemma, but also it's unclear whether you're ever able to make the best decision for humanity. Therefore, your best.
I don't want to make necessarily the best decision for humanity, A, but B, I can probably just stop things if they go too far and to change the decision, reverse it. I'm basically all powerful. That's great. Let's talk about the kind of the bottom line from what I'm telling you is that interaction is not only impossible, it's just active suffering. The interactions with my friends and their happiness and sadness that doesn't have meaning, and the knowledge that I could have made things different or that it doesn't have meaning and I can't relate to them, means I suffer every single day. But on the comparative, I still have some forms of communication with them. When I check in on them, when I look at how they're doing, and when every good thing that happens to them, I know I did. I know I gave it meaning and I know can be attributed to me. When they thank God for good things, I know they're actually thanking me, so they're communicating to me how grateful they are. How grateful they are. So I do have at least that sense of communication with them. I am still exposed to them in some way, and the interaction isn't actually suffering because I know that it has meaning to me and that I made it happen. So for all of those reasons, please propose. Yes.
Thank you very much for that fine speech. I'd like to invite the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to give their speech, please.
Hi, thanks so much. Am I audible?
Hi. Yeah, you are.
Splendid. Splendid. Okay. Just give me 2 seconds and then I'm gonna go into this. Okay. Right. Okay. 3, 2, 1. I think when the proposition's characterization shifts from someone with a few relative limits on their power to the necessity of an absolutely all-powerful, omnipotent being, ignoring all of Tin's characterization as to why specifically, even if that's the case, they're unlikely to be able to wholly exercise their power. I think that's indicative of an opposition that is likely winning this debate. I'm going to proceed through several lines of analysis. Firstly, I'm going to rebuild, showing at each point why things are comparative, and then I'm going to directly respond to their case, showing how they've conceded far too much to our side, and finally going on to the complexity of moral decision making. Okay, so they say that responsibility is symmetric on either side. I think that they concede this in their opening speech when Lior concedes that things that are more proximate to you are things that you tend to weigh more highly, and then they tell you that there's no distinction between an action and action. Why is deliberate and personal action something that is more proximate to you, weaponizing their own analysis and concession? 5 reasons. Firstly, it's just immediately more visceral because you see it and it's in front of you right now, i.e. you just have access to that information, you've made that decision, and you see the visceral consequences of it and tap back to yourself. Secondly, you're the cause. From the moment you're born, you have access to an individuated perspective. That means that you see things in one continuous train, so when you take an action, you tie it back directly to yourself, and it is something that is fundamentally socialized into every element of your brain to attach agency to that perspective and to hold yourself accountable there in that way. Think about the fact that none of us right now are crippled by guilt with the horrendous things that are happening in some segments of the developing world because we're able to compartmentalize and disassociate ourselves from that. If we were the person pulling the fucking gun, I think that would be a little bit harder. Thirdly, as a consequence of the fact that there are just like the overwhelming nature of it is such that, like, how do I explain this? The fact that it is likely iterative over an incredibly extended period of time means that greater and greater responsibilities arise simply by virtue of the role, right? Because it's socialized to you, because you're told how powerful they are, because you're told how specifically important it is. You're likely to conceive of this as a step up from yourself. So view a greater weight of moral responsibility being undertaken when you do this. As a consequence, you're likely to be like, that's particularly important, that's particularly bad, simply by virtue of how it's framed, simply by virtue of all of their analysis about the importance of it. Fourthly, and I think probably particularly, the risk is something that means that you probably weigh quite highly. Why? Because all of Tin's analysis about the craziness stuff, where you are quite likely to go insane. Just think about the fact that if you were locked in solitary confinement for the entirety of your life and bombarded by images of an infinite universe of people being tortured and viscerally dying, I don't think many of us would survive that, or many of us would stay sane, especially if it's dragged out for eternity. Now, the risk is constantly increasing of you perpetuating the very things that they claim you're horrified by. Note that Hadar literally says, yes, well, what if you can prevent a genocide? What if you can never know the point at which you are perpetuating genocides, at the point at which you are perpetuating famine and disease and death, and you're the individual who has absolute power to implement the worst conceivable things that you can immediately attach yourselves to, at the point at which you literally go insane and lose like any understanding of yourself, any understanding of the past, and have someone who's an immediate example of this is the only other point of it, reference by which you have the role. At that point, I think you probably overweigh that for 3 reasons, right? Firstly, because people tend to prioritize harm over immediate benefits. Why? Because at the point at which there's like happiness is always relativized, right? Because you get like just are immediately rewarded, and over time the hedonic cycle means that you become used to that because you have to seek higher levels of pleasure. You're always pushed to do that because you're always meant to build more because it's better for building societies and everyone around you. Pain, you tend to prioritize to a much greater extent. Why? Because if you've ever known anyone that's had a severe injury or back pain, the only thing that mitigates that is opioids. You wake up every day in crippling agony and crippling pain. The reason that you prioritize this and fear is, one, because when you know that you enact violence on someone, you know that it is something that is often like you're unable to return, or you're unable to like prevent, meaning psychologically you view that as more proximate. But note the thing that Tin says: we're socialized over millions, or we're literally genetically hardwired to prioritize fear over millions of generations, because all of the happy people died because they weren't running away from the lions. So the people that had greater fear responses literally ran away. So at the point at which you have you're more likely to respond to fear, note that even if it's a smaller chance, you're still likely to overweight that chance for 2 reasons. One, the scale that we've talked about, but 2, because fear makes individuals, even in their best case, fundamentally irrational. Think about the fact that more people are afraid of terrorists than cows, even though the cows kill more people every single year. Thus, on the weighing metric of how this person perceives it, they're likely to always prioritize it, even in their absolute best case, where you only perpetuate one fucking mass murder. At that point, I think there's 2 effects of this analysis. Firstly, you probably conceive of yourself as responsible. Secondly, you probably think it's unlikely that you have any ability to hedge against this. And thirdly, you're likely to massively prioritize the fact that you could perpetuate pain. And this is also further amplified by Tin's analysis axis which goes unresponded to, which is the uncertainty of your moral frameworks, i.e. there's a multifaceted, like billions upon billions of cultures within this universe. There's an infinite set of like moral decisions that you could possibly make, and a completely random set of forces that govern the universe. That means that two things: you're constantly faced with unique choices, and secondly, you're constantly faced with unique frameworks and methods that might be necessary to restrain individuals or achieve what you think is the best outcome that might be unpalatable to you. For example, you might have to implement a totalitarian state to restrict more aggressive species, but that's something that still feels morally abhorrent to you. That is something that you might have to contend with from this vantage point. At this point, you have two things. Firstly, that means that long term, you're likely unable to ever conceive of yourself as potentially doing good, and that amplifies the fear of the harm more, because given that doubt and given the potentiality of the methods you'd likely have to employ, you can never be certain if the end justifies the means. This is amplified by a third thing, of that it is likely literally impossible for you to have any access to future decisions merely by virtue of the infraslide, where they literally doubt the past and are literally living in the present. Therefore, you can never actually likely assess the long-term outcome of this. Consequently, the methods you employ that are brutal are amplified by the fact that there's a greater degree of uncertainty. This is then magnified by the time scale on which you exist. Go, Hadar.
Even if no one has any access to the truth or whatever, why do people vote? Why do they even care about the right political decision? Why do they have opinions on anything?
I think this is like very, very relatively reductive, right? Because you have to think about the fact that if you get to the top of being a CEO somewhere, you're faced with constant, perpetually morally grey decisions. At the level of universal truth, where you're contending with infinite forces, infinite species, infinite like disparate like contexts, it is probably just impossible to come to an answer. Now into the stuff about being crazy, because that I think deals with all of it. Just three responses to this. Firstly, you probably, you might think highly of yourself. You probably don't want to subject yourself to eternal torture. Secondly, you actually probably don't want this power. Why? Because they concede that you have all these like things like adventures, and power is meaningless at the point at which you're in a prison. So even if you do want it, you probably don't conceive of it that way, because it's literally like, oh, I have power just on an infinite improbability drive, going wherever I want, saving other people. Thirdly, as a consequence of that, you can probably reduce suffering in other ways, right? You can probably just, if you feel bad about it, you can deal with that going forward. Note that all of this deals with like basically everything they've said. Oh, and the relationship stuff, just two pretty obvious things. Firstly, you're probably just likely to compartmentalize it and seek out things like therapy, meaning that you can still value individuals writ large. Secondly, the absolute power thing just amplifies their harm, but crucially probably isn't true. At the point at which you have a singular perspective, you might have absolute power but can't act on it at all times, meaning that they're probably not controlling you 24/7. Thus you overweight your free will, which, as I've said before, you're already socialized to buy into. They're literally out of this debate by definition. Woo, logic. See you.
I thank you very much for that fine speech. I'd like to invite the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to give their speech, please. Sorry, the Government Whip to give their speech, please.
Okay, am I audible?
Yep.
Cool, just a sec. This goes here. Here. I hate whipping that too many pages. Why do people do that? Okay, starting in 3, 2, 1. Two clashes in this debate, not very surprisingly. Firstly, the moral one, who is going to be a better ruler for the universe? Secondly, on the personal level, what is going to bring me more personal and psychological fulfillment? I'll also weigh the first as more important than the latter. Rebuttal will be integrated. Let's start by discussing morality. So there are two main challenges, and a lot of analysis within them, will give them this credit, but two main challenges that could be summarizing the opposition case on morality in this debate. The first one is, there's a difference between action and inaction, right? It is feeling much worse to actively kill someone than it is to not donate to charity. Note that aside from this intuition part, literally this intuition part of killing versus giving to charity, they don't explain why. It sounds like possibly a psychological bias, which is not logically true. But furthermore, we think this analogy doesn't apply here. And the reason is very crucial, and Tamar already said this. You have a unique opportunity that no one else has. This is not the same as not saving someone or not donating to charity, right? It is not the equivalent of not donating against malaria. It is the equivalent of seeing in your own eyes a drowning child when you're the only person there who is able to stop it and choosing not to. This is the sort of guilt which we think is not very different from action. This is the point at which action doesn't feel different than inaction because you are the only one able to stop it and you made the active choice. So we think at this point, most of their case is symmetrical. The second thing that they said is, trade-offs. There's always a good and a bad and whatever, and we think that you don't have the pretense of knowledge or the epistemic access to the truth. Several answers to this. Firstly, symmetric. We have no idea why this alternative, like ruler of the universe, does have this epistemic access, but here are 3 further responses to this. A, they are lying. Not everything is a trade-off. Not what their analysis for trade-offs was. It wasn't a logical explanation as to why everything is a trade-off, but just giving some examples, like, lockdowns and whatever. Giving examples doesn't prove that everything is thus, right? I can give counter examples, like, say, the Holocaust, I think, was quite objectively bad. I'm really waiting to hear if Jack wants to contradict this and say there was a trade-off. Probably not. We think that there are objective harms in the world that we can stop, right? We can stop scarcity. We can stop death. We can stop, we can literally control the weather, the conditions, everything. We have no idea why everything is a trade-off. Secondly, and this is my POI to Kevin, I think we have an opinion on trade-offs. Note, I might not be objective. Funnily enough, this is an actual motion, not an analysis debate. I don't care what is the objectively correct morality. I have a strong opinion on lockdowns. I don't care if some people think the economy is more important than dead people. I think dead people are more important. Maybe this sector thinks otherwise. The point is they are likely to have an opinion, per yours analysis that got no responses to why they have developed throughout the years they had on Earth or any other planet, I don't know which, to actually develop their own sense of what is morality. So probably they do have a preference. They don't see it as objective. We have no idea, just because Kevin went to philosophy school, why every individual in the universe literally thinks this way of morality. We think most individuals think that they do have the right answer to this. And their answer to this is, but when you see so many things happening throughout the years, it's going to change this because you're going to develop a more objective perspective. Two things on that. Firstly, we are making the decision now. The question is, what are the incentives of the action now? This is not a regret motion about, do we regret becoming the ruler of the universe? We think now we do have a clear-cut answer. But secondly, we think that we are going to, even if we become more objective in some way, still have our moral grounds, right? The fact that we see the trade-offs across the universe doesn't mean that we won't have an intuition as to which one between them is more important. And again, not everything is a trade-off. At which point, we do think we have a strong moral feeling about what is the right thing to do. And then they tell us, but you will feel this responsibility about pain across the world, pain that you wouldn't have even known about. Three answers to this. It is like seeing a documentary. It is like seeing a violent film. Note, Kevin himself gives the concession that what we care about more is what is proximate to us. You know what's more proximate to us than just being aware of what happens everywhere? Living in it. Going back to your home planet, seeing people die and suffering, and people that are close to you and that you love, and knowing that you could have stopped it. Secondly, we can stop this suffering from happening, so we think that a lot of it can be saved from us. Thirdly, we already know a lot of this because we've spent a few days with this person and asked them a lot of questions. So they've probably already told us a lot of this suffering. So we think on all of those grounds, we have the moral responsibility to stop it. And even if we become more aware of the suffering, this is just a selfish incentive. This does not mean that we don't have the moral responsibility to try and make it better, even if we suffer a bit more. Let's weigh morality because we got no weighing on anything else right now. We think a lot of this already came, but here's for you, 5 different reasons as to why we're likely to care about morality more. Firstly, I probably developed some resentment towards this ruler of the universe, right? Across the days that I was there, I probably spoke to them and was like, why did you do this? Why didn't you stop it? Why did you kill my grandma? And when they answered to me, because I prioritize what is fun for me, I don't care about you, I developed resentment towards them. At the point that I do this, I cannot not think the same of myself. I will draw the analogy immediately. When I go back and decide, I prioritize my own personal gain over saving the world, I become just as bad as him. After blaming him and being mad at him, I'm probably going to think of myself in a similar way if I don't make a better choice. Secondly, we think that you are the sort of person who don't care that great deal about, solitude and stuff. You have traveled alone in space for months or years. You're being chased by aliens, so probably you don't have a lot of connections personally, meaning that presumably you can, get over the personal stuff. Thirdly, happiness is something you can get used to. We know already that depression is more common, not less, in developed countries. It is not just about the material well-being you have, how privileged you are, how good your conditions are. It is something that often you can get used to after you get a certain level of happiness that you're used to. We think that you can get through it at go.
Given the life of infinite imprisonment and pain and loneliness that you barely engage with, the analogy is not the drowning child, it's Jesus being crucified on the cross for the sins of humanity.
Okay, thanks. I'm getting to it, thanks. You'll have another speech and you gave a POI, come on. Okay. I just weighed why still we care more. Here are more reasons. We think I also draw happiness from being a good person, and I will draw active guilt from being a bad person. But you know what? Let's talk also about happiness because we think that we win on this as well. Here's the thing about happiness, right? We are Not sure why I'm going to suffer to such a great extent. There are a lot of assertions here. What do we hear? It is losing concept of time and solitude. So obviously it's going to be like solitary confinement. Logical gap, only based on intuition, which is not even necessarily applicable here because we don't even know if we are human or not. I don't know even if this person is an alien who is used to being with others or not. We know that they have been in space alone for a lot of time. I don't know why being in solitary confinement makes them crazy. B, we think that they will get used to it and they do have some interactions left with the world. It's not like solitary confinement. You still see things. If you want to see if you want to hear kids' laughter or see their smiles, you get an exposure to this on Earth. You just don't get the ability to be there personally. You get a lot of this as well. On our side, or on their side, as Tamar explained to you, you lose your communication with people because you feel meaningless. You feel like someone else controls your life, and this is much worse. Beg you to propose.
I thank you very much for that fine speech. I'd like to invite the opposition whip to close the debate as a whole, please.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah.
Excellent. Just give me 2 seconds to get this in order. Okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Firstly, why the immediate decision is likely to be incredibly harmful to you and you will want to run away. Secondly, why you will make the world actively worse and you have the capacity to continue to live a fulfilling life at the point at which you leave, implicitly responding to everything that we hear from the proposition bench. The first thing I want to say, though, is just responding to the idea we hear in that third speech. And the proximate feeling you're going to have at the point at which you make this decision is that you are turning your back on something, that it will feel like walking away from a drowning child. One, note that argument completely relies on the visceral image of a child being in front of your eyes. That is not the case when you are here. It is just a crazy guy telling you could do this. It is much easier to put the kind of distance between you and the problem we've explained to you is completely possible on proposition bench. It is functionally the same as me intellectually knowing that my actions are causing children in the developing world to die. I don't beat myself up over that all of the time or feel like I should destroy my MacBook. I understand that I'm able to distance myself. Secondly, as he was trying to explain in a POI before he got cut off, there is a huge sacrifice you have to make. It is not wading into the water to take someone out. It is sacrificing yourself on the cross, losing your entire life, taking on a huge degree of responsibility that you have no capacity to be aware for, knowing that you are becoming the person that Hadar tells you in her last speech you have a hatred for, you see as a Fruit Loops crazy individual who doesn't believe the world is real and just talks to a cat. All of this is proximate to you at the point at which you are engaging with this. Then they say that you're going to have your own opinions on these things so you won't feel that there's a weight of difficulty. One, note that the specific person you are is someone who has traveled around the universe. You are aware that there are a variety of different cultures far from what you were experiencing in your own life. That means you have some understanding at the moment you are making this decision of the complexity of international and intergalactic affairs. That means that you are probably aware that these things are far beyond you. You have gone to places where you literally don't understand a thing people are saying. Well, maybe you have a Babel fish, but you don't understand the meanings and the social understandings behind the things that those people are saying. You've gone to places where the moral scheme has been completely abstract to you and you have no capacity to engage with that. All of that means that you don't have opinions on these things. You only have them on a very narrowly defined group of things. Secondly, note that most people don't have an opinion on absolutely everything or specifically want to express that, because it's different between thinking something that might be better and wanting to actually take on the responsibility for doing that. That is why in the POI that they bring up, most people like to vote and have their voice heard and ideas, but most people don't want to become a dictator, because at that point they take on a huge degree of responsibility for all of the harm that they cause. Thirdly, note that you are likely very fearful of what would happen if you make the wrong decision. If you're to believe what Prop tells you about how you have a huge degree of feelings towards the moral duty that you have to the universe, that is likely to be what weighs in your mind maximally, because of all of Kevin's analysis that goes completely unresponded to as to how you weigh the negative things much higher than you do the positive things. Thirdly, I just want to note, even if you think you have some good opinions, there's a very easy solution to getting out of the guilt point that Gov talked about and making sure the universe gets better. What you do is you travel in your ship and you pick up Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King, or Douglas Adams and get them to control the universe, because you recognize that they would be a better person to do it than you. Nowhere in this debate does it say we cannot bring people to the moon and make them the new ruler. They have to specifically stand over you being the best possible person who could fix this world. That is something that you're likely to not have faith in. Because note, most individuals aren't that narcissistic, do doubt themselves, do recognize that there is a bounded degree to their existence, don't take on leadership. This is why even in small individual organizations, people don't often put themselves forward for leadership roles, because they don't believe that they necessarily would have the capacity to be able to do it. Then they say that you're likely to believe in yourself so much that you have the capacity to do this. Note, there's a difference between believing in yourself and thinking you could literally be God. That is an incredibly severe version of narcissism that about 0.1% of the population actually has when it comes down to it. Given that this is an actor motion and we're deciding this probabilistically based on what people are likely to think and likely to actually engage with, most individuals will not consider themselves possible of actually being able to engage with this. Secondly, note you have evidence before your eyes of just how difficult this is, because they try and say that you won't believe that the guy went crazy just because he was the ruler of the universe. But firstly, just think this through, and this is a form of logic that this person will be able to engage with. Why would they be given the position of ruler of the universe if they were crazy in the first place? It is far more likely that they were capable of it initially and it drove them crazy. Secondly, just note the direct forms of association that people make between things. At the point at which the two pieces of information you have about the man, that he's the ruler of the universe and he's absolutely fucking Fruit Loops, it's very unlikely that you just chalk that up to being a coincidence. You're much more likely to make that implicit connection, especially if, as they say, you are engaging with him, you find it very difficult to deal with, you are thinking a lot about his specific incentives, the specific way that he engages with. Thirdly, note that you literally have the most powerful spaceship in the world. There's one heart of gold in the entire universe, and you're using it to travel around everywhere. That implies that you're the type of person who likes to leave places behind, who is not comfortable with taking on huge amounts of responsibility, because that's what causes individuals to run away from home and travel throughout the universe. That means that the specific psychological profile that this actor is likely to have makes them not want to become that individual, not want to be banded in this one place, not want to be the person who is carrying on all of the degree of harm that will come with being leader of the universe. Then they say, and they try and specifically point out that when you are making this decision, you will overweight the positives. Note, we have a huge amount of analysis as to how the moment you are making this decision, you are likely to be incredibly afraid of it. The fact that you see this individual as being crazy, the fact that you will overweight the negative things, the fact that you have no understanding of the positive things that they talk about, like people thanking God and realizing that affects you. Most of us can't conceptualize how that works, but we can conceptualize harm because we have done harm and we've been the victims of harm. We know there are analogies in our world, like the people who have died in wars and come back with PTSD. All of these things are available to you at that moment, and all of that creates the overwhelming urge to run or to make a more considered decision and ask someone else to be the ruler of the universe. All of that means if they want to make this debate about the moment that you make this decision, overwhelmingly your likelihood will be that you run away from this crazy guy, not take on that responsibility. Equally, not think about how difficult it is going to be going back to your life, because all you want to do is get back to that normality and you will deal with the difficulties that come later. All of that means that resoundingly, you do not want to be the leader of the universe. You recognize that that will be incredibly hard. You're unlikely to make that decision. I'll quickly take a POI from the opposition before I move on to the rest of your life.
If you're really such a voyager who wants your freedom, if you really are so afraid of not having an opt-out, the scariest thing is having someone else make the decisions for you, knowing that it is deterministic and nothing you do can change it ever. You'd rather take the control yourself.
That's completely untrue, because recognize you're a person who always leaves the places that they arrive as soon as it gets difficult. You are always opting out of that responsibility. Specifically, you want individual control over yourself, not a universe that is controlled for you. All of that means you're likely to think in that way. They say that you're going to be incredibly unhappy when you leave. One, as Keating points out, thousands of coping mechanisms that individuals have developed. The action and action distinction, the fact that every single one of us right now could be committing our lives to charity, but we don't, but are all willing to accept it. Secondly, note that at their absolute best, what this shows is that you will be as unhappy on both sides of the house, because they never respond to our analysis about the sheer difficulty of this job and how likely it is to drive you crazy. However, on their side, you are as unhappy as they say you are going to be, but you can cause genocides. You control the entirety of the universe. That is worse for two reasons. One, you have more responsibility. Two, you are likely to cause more harm, which if they claim that you care about morality, that is likely to be bad. Fourthly, note, and this is just sadly true, at our worst, we can die. We can exit the fact that we don't feel comfortable within our family lives. On their side, they are immortal. They have to live with the pain of experiencing this for the entirety of their life. They have to live with that responsibility and knowing that every single harmful thing in the universe that happens is caused by them, with no escape whatsoever. Regardless of how you look at this is clearly an incredibly bad idea, whether for the universe, whether for the individual, and especially for this traveler. Please oppose.
Thank you very much for that fine speech. I believe, like I said, this is closed, so I think the panel will stay in this room and adjudicate. Sorry, I was about to sneeze, sorry.